Nobody understands anything about car design, yet it's a subject that stirs up the crowds. No matter the model, everyone has a very specific opinion. Some find this prettier than that, while others prefer this to that. Some even think this is more stylish than that. But when you dig deep, few enthusiasts truly know why they prefer one thing over another. When people discuss a car they like, three words often come up: modern, neo-retro, and aggressive. And when it comes to elaborating and arguing, no one can concretely explain what makes a car beautiful. So yes, I know you're going to tell me that beauty is subjective and that all tastes are in nature. However, this doesn't apply to design. I concede the point. It's true, but not the only truth. I've been drawing cars since age 3 and have worked for multiple car manufacturers across 5 countries. For nearly a decade, I have meticulously analyzed the style of every model released in the market. To create a well-executed design, there are certain rules and important elements that must be followed and respected. The subjective aspect varies for each person. When a car manufacturer invests millions of euros in launching a model, there is a complex mathematical logic behind its design, which will ensure that the majority will like and which will sometimes even secure the success of certain models that you personally hate. Some well-engineered cars have failed due to poor design. And we even have examples of brands that have not found their audience because of a really style. For a century, automotive designers worldwide have been experimenting with various parameters, searching for the perfect formula. Certain elements persistently arise in this ongoing search, whether we want them to or not. I don't possess the full formula or solution to this perpetual pursuit. That would be too easy, but what is certain is that I can give you the important elements to change so that any car becomes ugly. By definition, if we can make any model uglier, we can enhance beauty by doing the opposite on specific characteristics. In this video, we will work together on the mathematics of car design. I'll share rules, technical terms, and designer tips found on popular models. That way, when you discover a new car with your fresh, enlightened, enthusiast eyes, you can understand why you love or why you hate it. Most importantly, tell your friend who thinks it's stylish why it's wrong. Today, we're going to get into the details to make you leave the clan of muggles who don't know what they're talking about. For that, I filmed outdoor scenes by placing automotive tape on the Jaguar I bought for my transformation project. We will draw lines to show the various elements before drastically changing it. If you missed the start of the project, don't hesitate to check out my latest video on the subject, and to make sure it's clear and that you too become bosses of automotive design. I even brought out my little graphic palette to draw this live on the screen for you, so get comfortable. We begin with the mysterious line found on all cars worldwide, which is undoubtedly the most crucial. The Y0 line, a crucial line in automotive design, is found on all cars. Since it's simply the line that cuts the car in two, when viewed from the front, there's a line in the middle called the Y0. Why is it named Y0? It's called that because a three-dimensional object is defined by three axes X, Y, and Z, and this one therefore is the Y0, that is to say the 0 point of the Y line. I don't know if it's very clear, but you understood the Y0 line. Why is it important? Well, it's mainly because it's often drawn first. When starting a car design project, we begin with a silhouette corresponding to the Y0 line. It gives us a lot of information about the proportions of the car, and it's one of the most important things. If we want a car to be successful, we really need to manage its proportions. So this side view, this Y0 line, it allows us to place all the different elements in relation to each other. This is what we will see as the video progresses, and it particularly allows us to define the second important term, the wheelbase. The wheelbase is the distance between the centers of the front and rear wheels when viewed from the side of the vehicle. If we have a wheelbase that's too long, it doesn't look great. And if we have a wheelbase that's too short, it results in a microcar. Obviously, that doesn't work. The wheelbase is a crucial element in balancing a car and understanding its size, although there are no definitive rules. The wheelbase length should be appropriate for the specific models you're making, not too long or too short. But what we're generally going to try to do is to have a wheelbase that's about 3 times the size of a wheel, so some models are really successful. Viewed in profile, there's clearly space for 3 wheels in the wheelbase. As examples, I'll consider a Porsche 911, an Aston Martin V8 Vantage, and a Mercedes AMG GT. When defining the wheelbase in profile view relative to the car's total length, we also need to define the overhangs, which is our third term. The overhang, quite simply, is the space we have between the hub of the wheel and the very front point of the vehicle. That's for the front overhang. You've understood, the rear overhang is rather the opposite, from the middle of the rear wheel to the very end of the vehicle. The front and rear overhangs, they are super important to give dynamism to the car. I use the Jaguar as my example, as it's my current car and we'll be transforming it together. So you see that the Jaguar, it has a rear overhang that is very large, but since it's quite low, it works. Generally, we're going to have really short overhangs on the off-road vehicle because you need to have a sufficient angle to be able to tackle the hills. And at the front, we also try to have the shortest possible overhang. So it shouldn't be too short. It shouldn't be just after the wheel at the level of the overhang, front. Because you still need to have a little bit of space to turn your car and go from the wing to the face in a fluid way, let's say in a coherent way. But when we have front overhangs that are too long, it completely breaks the dynamics of a car. It gives the impression that we have a rather plunging snout, and it's true that it doesn't look great. I can also give you a few examples. Like old Corvettes, cars from the 80s that had very long front overhangs. The Peugeot 407 Coupe, for instance, had a massive front overhang. As a result, it was a bit of a disadvantage because it really gives a very retracted front wheel compared to the body, and so it's much less dynamic. So, wheelbase, front overhang, rear overhang, these are really the elements that will define the car in its length. But there is something else very important that we can know from the Y0. It's the proportions in height. And for that, we come to our fourth term, the ratio. The ratio, quite simply, is the size relationship between the glazed area and the bodywork. On a Rolls-Royce, for example, we will always have a third of windows for 2/3 of bodywork. It's one of the fundamental rules, let's say, it's one of the known rules in automotive design. Why do we want to have a harmonious ratio? If the windows are too small, the bodywork takes up most of the vehicle's height, which is unfortunate. Overly large windows completely disrupt the car's dynamic appeal, making it feel like a Pope-mobile. So we need to find the perfect balance between the size of the windows and the size of the bodywork. It should not be too small on one side or too large, it really needs to be balanced. And so as I mentioned to you, the example of the Rolls-Royce, it's 1/3, 2/3. This allows for a stately look that remains elegant and proportional to the vehicle's dimensions without resembling a steak too closely. On sports cars, of course, you're going to have a smaller ratio. It adds sportiness. On cars, like minivans, you're going to have a lot of glazed space. It's important to be aware of what's happening outside, especially for children to have a view of the world. However, this tends to happen less and less. The glazed space between an old 3008 and a modern 3008 has been significantly reduced. And, as I was talking about in my video on Peugeot, it's one of the characteristics that allows to give a bit more dynamism to this format. So, if we talk about ratio and window size, we can come to our fifth term, the DLO. So, the DLO, I don't even know how to say it. Actually, it's an English term. It means daylight opening. So, the openings on the day, that is to say all the openings that we let in the daylight, namely the front and rear windows, and of course the windshield at the front and rear. The ratio refers to the relationship between the DLO and the body, not to be confused with daytime running light, which corresponds to the lights that are always on. Let's discuss the light signature. I also need to talk to you about the pillars. The pillars, you will always hear about them with a precision behind pillar A, pillar B, pillar 100. And it's simply, in fact, these pieces of bodywork that allow to join the roof and the side of the car. So the pillar A, it always exists. The pillar 100 as well. Sometimes we don't have a pillar B. And the same, in design, we aim for a thin pillar A instead of a big sturdy one. For pillar 100, we have more creative freedom to make different shapes. BMW is renowned for the shape of its C-pillar and rear window design, known as the Hofmeister kink. I discussed this in an earlier video that regular viewers would have seen. The pillars today still hold the same meaning. It was common to see that on American cars in the 50s and even earlier. In the past, A-pillars were in the opposite direction of the road. Today, they are always in the direction of the road. Well, at the time, no, not necessarily. It allowed not to have the pillar that hinders in the field of vision, but we completely stopped doing that. You will never see a car with that setup for a simple reason. In an accident, the force is not distributed properly when done that way. If the impact is in the direction of the road, the force of the shock is well distributed and travels through the car, allowing it to absorb some of the impact. Another crucial element found on nearly all cars is the belt line. The belt line is the line that will travel the car from front to back. There is not always one, but it is still very common. On my Jaguar, this line runs from the front to the rear headlight, belting the entire car. We call it the belt line, and it can be located right under the windows. Or it can be a little bit offset, whether in width or height. If offset in width, it will create a shoulder and give the car's wing curvature. We come to our technical term. Number 9, the angle of the cabin. Before I talk to you about that, I need to explain to you what the cabin is. So the cabin is everything that happens above the waistline, generally. The canopy comprising the windshield, windows, and rear windshield represents the cabin. The cabin's position is crucial. Again, from a side view, either we move it forward or we move it back. The angle of the cabin refers to the degree of tilt applied to the cabin windows. This feature contributes to the dynamism of the design, which I will discuss further. This allows for a very sporty vehicle when it's inclined and a utility or off-road 4x4 when it's straight. You should know that today we have cars with cabins that are more and more inclined, because obviously it's better for air penetration. It's very rare to find completely straight A-pillars, except maybe on the Citroën Olli concept car. It's been a long time since I've seen one. And now, you're going to tell me if the angle of the cabin is as open as possible, it makes the car dynamic. Yes, but you still have to measure. Why? Because we have another important point, and that's the length of the hood. The length of the hood is crucial. Regrettably, not many modern cars feature long hoods these days. And yet, it brings a very stately aspect to cars. At the beginning of the century, when engines were made by lining up the cylinders one by one, 6, 8, 10, 12. Well, we had no other choice but to find space to fit these big engines. Ultimately, the hood length also symbolized the car's power. Today we can create powerful, compact engines, but they remain a vital aspect of a car's identity. If you have a very long hood, it means you have a lot of power, you have a sports vehicle, while if you have a very short hood, it's much less status-oriented. Visually, it doesn't work as well. The cabin angle needs to be quite open. However, it shouldn't extend too far onto the hood, as this will visually reduce the hood's length. And there, as a result, it doesn't work anymore. Another interesting example is in cartoons. Do you remember the size of the cars in cartoons? When it's the car of a villain, when it's the car of a boss. You have very, very long hoods because it represents a certain stature, a certain prestige. To achieve an elegant and sporty look, the hood should be as long as possible. But that's not all, we also have to manage our 11th point, the thickness above the front wheel. And this is where we get into all the complexity of the mess, and with the example of the Jaguar, you will understand very well what I am talking about. In modern design, we try as much as possible to make sure that the thickness above the front wheel is as thin as possible. We don't like having a big chunk of material that really breaks the dynamics and will make the proportions of the cars much less attractive. BMW, for a very long time, was very good at doing this, managing to have short front overhangs, very long hoods, and spaces at the front wheels that are quite reduced. You need to fit the engine and many technical components. However, a large lump above the front wheel ultimately results in a far less attractive and more awkward silhouette. So today, we really try to reduce this space, and there are even tricks that exist to make this space appear thinner than it actually is. Adding lines, like the example of the 3008 I discussed in my Peugeot video, is particularly effective. With this thickness above the front wheel, we have another super important design element that happens around the front wheel. That's our number 12 point. The dash to axle, or rather the dash to axle line, it's ultimately the line that will trace a segment. We would start from the center of the front wheel up to the top of the windshield, creating the dash to axle line. Generally, it's the extension of the A-pillar when everything goes well. Then we sometimes have cars with an A-pillar which does not fall at all on the front wheel. This design flaw penalizes the vehicle. Ideally, the dash to axle line should be as inclined as possible. If it's too vertical, it immediately shows that we're dealing with a more utilitarian and sturdier vehicle. Again, for all these terms that I just gave you and all the others that will follow, there are no absolute rules, there is no right way to do it. There isn't a car that has ticked all the boxes and allowed to have the best ratio everywhere, the best elements placed in the right place. In fact, it depends on a lot of things. It's the relationships between elements that make it work or not work. So it's not by following a simple cooking recipe, unfortunately, that we manage to make a great car. And then it also depends a lot today on the technical packages we have. So designers often fight with the technical side to get the best possible package, the best proportions. It allows for sexier, easier to draw things. Speaking of the technical package, point number 13 is what I consider the religion of the designer, the rims. Rim size can make or break a car's design. That's the simple truth. It's super important to have wheels and rims that stand out well, that are well placed. So, already a front and rear wallet quite short so that the rims are well at the ends of the box. Primarily, we strive to emphasize the rims as much as possible, avoiding small shopping cart wheels that would disrupt the silhouette. And so you will find today on modern cars a lot of devices to highlight these rims. Make the rim appear visually larger than its actual size. This is commonly done with wheel lips and plastics around wheel arches. And there are even concept cars where the rim design extended onto the tire. So this is to tell you how extremely important it is to have a rim that is well highlighted, well open. Even though I know that today, there are many new rims with unusual shapes, sometimes almost resembling scribbling. In fact, we're going to try as much as possible on the rims to have the spokes rims that end wider than they start. This once again allows to create this opening effect like a flower, and thus visually give more importance to the rim. The rim, it defines everything. So if you're hesitating or configuring a car, know that I always try to have the largest possible rim size. Except on off-road vehicles where really we're going to have a lot of tires, so it makes sense to have rims that are not necessarily gigantic. We've all seen images of American 4x4s with 23-inch rims and tiny tires. It's true that it doesn't always work, so it's best to strive for balance. But in any case, for sports cars, it's clear and net. And even for everyday cars, let's try to have the largest possible rim sizes. It's my fight and yours too. The size of the rims defines many things, including our attitude and perspective. So the attitude of a car, it's a bit weird to say. The car, it's obviously not a human personality, so it doesn't have an attitude, it doesn't have a character. But in reality, in its design, that's really what we try to convey. That's why I often said, we hear the term aggressive, it's aggressive, the aggressive attitude of the car. In fact, we are always looking to have a car well positioned on its four wheels. With the wheels in the corners, with rims that reach the edge of the body, this visually places the car well on the ground, adjusting the attitude. It's about positioning the car properly and avoiding tucked in or very thin rims. Because it almost looks like someone who would be very strong but who would have very small calves, and it lacks stability, it lacks anchoring. Moreover, sports cars have large tires, not only to transfer power to the ground, but as a result, it gave this desire to have cars with an attitude always well grounded. The attitude is also the expression of the car, and so I'm going to give you a very concrete example to understand what I'm talking about. The expression of the front face. If I do this, it's aggressive. If I do this, it's rather neutral, let's say. It expresses quiet strength, a form of luxury, and if I do this, it's rather dramatic. Cars with slightly drooping eyes have a less dynamic look, which inevitably makes them less attractive. Today, you will examine the current production. 90% or more of the cars have the lights. This angle gives a more assertive, serious and confident look, which is what people ultimately seek. Since we're discussing the front face, let's move on to the 15th point. The graphic harmony. The concept of graphic harmony may seem vague at first, but it's actually quite easy to grasp. The idea is that today on cars, we can make any shape we want. In reality, we strive to maintain harmony, coherence, and a consistent theme. Around the car, we're not going to make a very complicated front face and a perfectly simple rear or the sides of a car. With a lot of strong lines, a lot of details, a lot of hollows, a lot of waves, a lot of full of stuff, and make a totally smooth front like a Tesla. There is a kind of harmony that needs to be maintained so that the theme of the front of the car responds to the theme of the rear. It should be coherent and work well together. Additionally, regardless of the number of lines on the car, they must still attempt to respond to and connect with each other. Because otherwise, in fact, the eye will wander and will not know where to land. So it makes for bad readings. Today, even on cars with a robust, well-filled, and quite complicated front-face design, the lines, however, do connect. We try to do something that allows the eye to navigate without interruption. Muscles. It's not something that's reserved for humans only, it's also found on cars. Obviously, it may seem paradoxical to you, but in fact, when we talk about a muscle, we're talking about a volume that is not defined by a line. We're discussing a volume that manifests in curves, giving some models a muscular appearance. It's always beneficial to be aware of this. Next time you see a car that you really like, try to understand a little bit where the muscles are. Rear wings are a common location for these parts, which designers often highlight. Moving on to point 17, tension. A term, too, which is almost human, but we're not talking about blood pressure, we're talking about the tension between lines. Why? Because you always, when you're designing, need tension. That means something has to happen. We can't have totally horizontal lines every time. We need to have spacings, gaps. There needs to be a bit of dynamism. There needs to be tension between the lines or between the volumes. Often it's the tension that makes a design remarkable and makes it interesting. And by the way, I take this opportunity to tell you that it's extremely rare on modern cars to have lines that are completely parallel. I think I've never seen an example where we have perfectly straight lines, perfectly parallel to each other. There's always a small angle, there's always a little dynamism that is created. And likewise, another fun fact that you can observe yourself, there is never a line that is perfectly straight, perfectly rectilinear. There is always a small angle in one dimension or another. No line on a car is ever perfectly straight in all three axes, as it would break the vehicle's dynamic design. Another thing I wanted to tell you about straight lines is that there's only one car from the modern era. Let's say in quotes, the Fiat Panda has a perfectly flat and straight windshield. At the time, it had a windshield made of glass with no curve. And it's super rare, so next time you see one, you know you'll be studying a rarity of automotive design. They made that decision at the time due to budget and cost considerations. That's what gives it its very square, specific side. Another point I wanted to discuss, which I've mentioned in another video, is the number 18. Anthropomorphism, as I've mentioned in my BMW video, is the attribution of human characteristics to non-human entities. Anthropomorphism is the fact that a car looks like something we could consider to be human or animal. So there are really a lot of brands that are working in this field. Alfa Romeo's design will resemble an eagle more, while BMW's past models aim to emulate sharks. The Twingo, a small, friendly frog-like car, utilizes anthropomorphism to create its appealing attitude. It allows to go look for codes, to attract sympathy for a model, or to make sure that we find a model is fierce or sporty, etc. There you have it, friends, the few technical terms I wanted to share with you today. I've certainly forgotten a lot, I'll realize it a bit later, so we will certainly maybe do a second episode if you're interested. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this format, if the topic interests you, and if you learned anything. Knowing I helped you understand automotive design and that you can practice it on the street will always make me happy. Share your thoughts in the comments about what works, what doesn't, and why you like or dislike it. Let me know if it's something you enjoy. Maybe we can do another format with other technical terms. I also plan to discuss various car formats like sport utility vehicle crossover, convertible, and limousine in this video. I think it's going to be too long, so I'll cut it off here. We'll meet again soon for another video, either a car project or one on technical terms. Let me know what you prefer in the comments. Bye!